There is a harvest ledger in the Ostrame Provincial Records Hall, filed under Agricultural Registry R-229, that covers the growing seasons from founding year 301 through founding year 318. The entries are consistent for every year except two. In founding year 309 and founding year 310, the harvest columns are not merely low. They are blank, not marked as failed, not annotated with an explanation, simply empty, as if the scribe had intended to return and fill them in and never did. The ledger was catalogued in founding year 341 and has not been formally reviewed since. I found AR-229 while researching agricultural administration in the Ostrame lowlands during the early founding period. Harvest records from this era are typically dense with notation, quantities, weather observations, tax assessments, notes on seed stock and soil condition. The Ostrame scribes of this period were meticulous. Their other entries in the same ledger are models of administrative precision, which is what makes the two blank years impossible to dismiss as carelessness. Something happened in founding years 309 and 310 that produced no harvest worth recording. And whatever it was, the scribe chose silence over explanation. The Ostrame Provincial Records Hall is not the only archive where this gap appears. I spent several months tracing the administrative records of 6 provinces that fell under the authority of the early founding compact during this period. Agricultural registries, weather observation logs, tax collection records, census supplements, the kind of documentation that survives in fragments across multiple institutions because it was produced in quantity and stored in multiple locations. In 5 of the 6 provinces, records from founding years 309 and 310 are either absent, severely diminished in volume, or contain explicit notations of disruption whose cause is not named. One notation in the weather observation log of the Merrath Hills station, a secondary archive, I found cited in a footnote of an unrelated institutional history, reads simply, "Light diminished. Duration unknown at time of writing, crop suspended." The entry is dated to the early months of founding year 309. The next entry in the same log is dated to the final months of founding year 310, 19 months of observation, from a station whose purpose was continuous daily recording, reduced to 2 lines and a gap light. Diminished, duration unknown at time of writing. But here is where the detail first resists easy explanation. The Ostrame Scholarium, the province's primary institution of learning and record keeping during the founding period, maintained a chronicle of provincial events that ran continuously from founding year 280 through founding year 390. The Chronicle is one of the most complete institutional records from this era. It has been studied, cited, and excerpted in histories of the founding period for generations. It is considered reliable. The Chronicle contains entries for every year of its span, with one exception. Founding years 309 and 310 are present in the Chronicle. They have entries, but those entries are unlike every other entry in the document. Where a typical year receives between 12 and 40 pages of notation, seasonal events, administrative decisions, deaths of notable figures, trade movements, weather patterns, disputes, and their resolutions, founding years 309 and 310 together receive 11 lines. 11 lines for 2 years. The years immediately before and after them receive their usual volume. The Chronicle does not explain the compression. It does not note that records were lost or that the period was difficult to document. It simply moves through those 2 years in 11 lines and continues as if nothing about the proportion is unusual. I read those 11 lines many times. They describe, in the careful neutral language of institutional chronicle, a period of reduced agricultural activity, increased mortality among the elderly and very young, movement of population toward the southern lowlands, and what the Chronicle calls an alteration in the quality of daylight that persisted across 2 growing seasons. That phrase, an alteration in the quality of daylight, is the closest any official Ostrame document comes to describing what AR-229's harvest ledger simply left blank, an alteration in the quality of daylight that persisted across 2 growing seasons. And this is where the pattern across provinces becomes harder to attribute to coincidence. I identified 9 institutional chronicles, or continuous administrative logs, from different provinces covering the founding year 300 through 320 period. Of those 9, 7 show the same compression or absence at precisely the same years. Not approximately the same years. The same years founding year 309 and 310 appear as a shared gap or near. Silence across 7 independent documentary traditions maintained by institutions that had no formal relationship with each other and no known mechanism for coordinating their record keeping. The 2 chronicles that do not show the gap are both from coastal provinces at the far western edge of the founding compact's territory. Both are fragmentary in other respects, which makes the absence of the gap difficult to interpret. It may mean the western coast was less affected. It may mean their records from this period are simply incomplete in different ways. I cannot determine which from the documents I was able to access. What I can note is that 7 provincial institutions independently produced the same documentary silence at the same moment, and that none of them explained it. Now here is where the testimony becomes the most difficult part of the picture to hold. The Scholarium of Ostrame maintained, in its later centuries, a collection of what it called the Elder Testimonies. Accounts gathered from elderly residents by Scholarium scribes during a documentation effort conducted in founding years 380 through 395. The purpose of the project was to capture living memory of the early founding period, before the last witnesses of that era died. The testimonies were transcribed, bound, and archived. They cover agricultural practices, building techniques, trade customs, family lineages, and local histories of individual settlements. I read through the volumes covering settlements in the central and northern Ostrame lowlands. The testimonies are extraordinary in their specificity about most things. Elderly residents in founding year 380 described in precise detail events from 60 and 70 years prior. Prices paid for grain, names of village administrators, the outcomes of water disputes, the exact location of boundary markers that had since been moved. When those same witnesses were asked about founding years 309 and 310, the specificity collapsed. Not uniformly, not dramatically, but consistently enough to notice. Accounts that had described events from founding year 305 in careful detail became vague when they reached 309. Several witnesses said they did not remember those years clearly. One described it as a time that is hard to hold in the mind, like trying to remember a dream. Another, an elderly farmer from the northern settlements, said only, "We did not go outside much. I don't remember what we did instead." A third witness, when asked directly about the harvest of founding year 309, paused for what the transcriptionist noted as a considerable time before saying, "There was no harvest to remember." There was no harvest to remember. The transcriptionist's notation of the pause is the detail I return to. It is unusual in the elder testimonies to find such notations. The scribes were trained to record speech, not silence. That one of them recorded the pause suggests it was long enough, or weighted enough, to seem worth noting. The witness was not confused. They were remembering something they did not particularly want to describe. I searched the elder testimonies for any witness who offered a direct account of what the 2 dark years were like, what the light looked like, what the cold felt like, whether people understood what was happening while it was happening. I found fragments, a woman who described the sun as appearing like a lamp seen through heavy cloth. A man who said that noon in founding year 309 looked the way dusk usually looked in summer. A child at the time, elderly at interview, who said that during those years her mother had kept candles burning throughout the day, and that she had assumed, until she was older, that this was simply what daytime was. She had assumed until she was older that this was simply what daytime was. None of these accounts appear in any official provincial chronicle. They are in the Elder Testimonies, a collection that was archived and has been accessible for centuries. They have not, as far as I can determine, been connected in any formal study to the gaps in the harvest ledgers, the compressed chronicle entries, or the shared silence across 7 provincial documentary traditions. But here is perhaps the detail that sits most heavily. In founding year 312, 2 years after the gap ends, the Ostrame Scholarium undertook what its own administrative records describe as a comprehensive review and consolidation of provincial chronicle records from the preceding decade. The consolidation project ran for 3 years. At its conclusion, the Scholarium issued a summary report stating that the provincial chronicle had been verified for accuracy and continuity, and that records found to be redundant, fragmentary, or of uncertain provenance had been removed from the main collection and placed in secondary storage. The Scholarium's secondary storage archive was destroyed in a fire in founding year 447, 135 years after the consolidation project. The fire's cause is documented as accidental. What the secondary storage contained at the time of the fire is not inventoried in any surviving record. The consolidation project's working documents, the materials that would show which records were reviewed, which were kept, and which were moved, are not in the Scholarium's surviving archive. A comprehensive review of records covering the decade that includes the 2 blank years, conducted 2 years after those years ended. Its working documents gone, its secondary storage destroyed a century later. Each of these facts is individually unremarkable. Institutional records are consolidated. Secondary storage is sometimes destroyed. Fire happens. The Scholarium survived and continued producing records of extraordinary quality for another 4 centuries. But the Harvest Ledger R-229 was not part of the Scholarium's collection. It was held in the Provincial Records Hall, a separate institution with a separate archive. It was not reviewed in founding year 312. Its blank columns were not consolidated or explained. They were simply left as they were, empty, uncaptioned, waiting for a scribe who never returned to fill them in. The Provincial Records Hall is open to researchers 4 days a week. AR-229 is on the 3rd shelf of the Agricultural Registry section, between a record of mill taxation from founding year 298 and a seed stock survey from founding year 323. The blank columns for founding years 309 and 310 are still there. The Scholarium's Elder Testimonies are bound in 14 volumes in the institution's reading room. The woman who described the sun as a lamp, seen through heavy cloth, is in volume 7. The child who grew up thinking candles at noon were normal is in volume 11. They recorded what they remembered. The chronicles recorded almost nothing, and somewhere between those 2 facts. In the secondary storage that burned in founding year 447, something may have explained the difference. Or it may not have. The Harvest Ledger does not say.